Is this okay? So, I came to New York City in June 1994, not knowing a single person, and literally I didn't know anybody. But I was very lucky to get a job as the all-purpose gallery assistant in the John Weber Gallery. It was one of the several galleries at 420 West Broadway. It was the center of our world. And within 2 months, I felt that I knew almost everybody in the art world. Every artist, collector, art trucker, but the most important people and connect into the community were Walter Robinson and Edith DeAk. And I'm forever grateful to Walter. So the way it happened is the John Weber Gallery, believe it or not, did not even have a reception desk. And it was big, two big open galleries, and there was an office for John Weber, and then there was a narrow Pullman kitchen type office where I would sit at the typewriter. And the entire art world came into that office, and every afternoon the great artists of the gallery represented, Soho, Carl, Hans Hacke, would sit on the Formica counter. There weren't even chairs, and would just sit around and talk. It was the clubhouse. So one afternoon, I was there, Walter and Edith walk in with a big stack of ART-RITEs and leave them on the counter. And this was something that they normally did. And I said, well, wait a minute, what's this? And, oh, we do stuff for every issue. And so in those days, this is so before social media, all you needed to do to communicate with every single person in the international art world was to leave stacks of ART-RITE at John Weber Gallery, Paula Cooper, OK Harris, a few other places. And that was it. That's all you needed. Everybody got the issue, and everybody was in on the discourse. So, coming to leave the issues started a friendship, and there a famous ART-RITE loft on Wooster Street that was an open house, and if you wanted to connect, discourse, meet anyone, you just had to show up. And I had never written art criticism, but Walter and Edith said, oh, if you'd like to write something, sure, you can be an ART-RITE. And for me, that was amazing to be able to get this invitation to participate, things right at the center. And I did write an essay, but it had there's a strange story that goes with it. So I handled the front desk and the typewriter or the top. And the person who handled the hanging of the paintings, painting the walls, or sometimes with my help, was the great Arcangelo. So Chris and I became friends, and I decided, is this one on? Okay, all right, okay. And I decided that the first essay that I'd write, the first essay for ART-RITE, would be a story about Christopher D'Arcangelo. So Chris and I worked so hard on this and wrote the essay, and the person we respected most in those days in our circle was Carl Andre. He was really the king. And it's hard to imagine now, circumstances changed, but Carl was really it. So Christopher didn't want the work published until Carl read it and approved. So Carl read the essay, and he said, this cannot be published. It's not publishable. And I had to tell Walter and Edith, I'm sorry, Carl Andre won't allow this to be published. And if Carl didn't allow it, that was it. That was the word of God. And I can't tell you how devastated I was, and also Chris, because this was the first writing about him. And so years go by, and Jay Sanders does a memorial show, Chris D'Arcangelo, at Artist Space. This is around 2010, 11. And I remember, for this essay, I dig it out, and it's a wonderful essay. And luckily it now has seen the light of day, unfortunately, not when Chris was alive. But so that's my only actual semi-contribution to ART-RITE. But I have to say that the downtown community in the mid-1970s without ART-RITE would have been completely different. There would be a giant gap. Because this was the center of the discourse. And I remember very well when one of my heroes at the time, Alan Suicide, was on the cover with the image of a jockey. He used to go to the track all the time. That's how he earned his living. And how exciting that was to see that and to actually meet the person who was on the cover of ART-RITE. It was an absolutely remarkable contribution. So great to have Walter here. And what I'm going to do is, Walter, I'm going to have you introduce everyone else. And I'm going to get off, and then I might participate in some audience questions a little later.
Hello, does this work? So we actually invited Carlo to be the moderator, but sitting up here with us is Robin Winters, who was in the issue many times. I'm sorry, I should have introduced Pat first, Pat Steir. She did the index paintings. What did you call those paintings? Not indexes. Anyway, and Carlo. I have it written down, I took notes, and obviously we should have insisted that Jeffrey give us his essay to publish. I would have gladly left out one of my essays and put his in.
I'm actually surprised, that you didn't just insist on publishing it, especially if Carl didn't want to publish. That would have been much more in keeping with ART-RITE. Anyway, I'm Carlo. I'm going to try to moderate this. Thanks to Jeffrey for the great words ahead of time and for being somebody who, despite keeping his eye on the new, has always had a really deep sense of history. To all of you for coming out. It's amazing that we can still draw a crowd in Soho on a rainy Tuesday night. So New York's not everything we say it is. And I think Primary Information deserves a really great shout out. What they're doing is a really phenomenal project. Most of this stuff is once it gets relegated to history, it becomes really esoteric, and they're really allowing these primary sources to get out there in a great way. And mostly to Pat, Robin, and Walter for letting me ask them questions. What struck me in looking and kind of enjoying this compendium is, and we have to be wary of nostalgia for sure, but one thing that strikes me is a little different than today is how strong we allowed and how prominent we allowed artist voices to be. Right now there's a much more of a chattering class of all the art workers, a whole industry around it, and collectors have their say, and there's all these different people who say, and I don't know how often we bother to listen to artists as much as you could tell it was prominent then, and you could see through the ads. I don't know, who sold the ads? You got a lot of ads. Edit did. But that it would have a place like that, and that artists could speak directly. And so I thought maybe to start, you would explain to me a little bit about the nature of the conversation going on back then and the artist's place within it. Is that vague enough for you? Do you want to go past that?
Does this work?
Well, we met in a seminar on art criticism, the three of us who started it, if that's not exciting enough. And we applied to the Whitney Independent Study Program as critics, and I think that's where we met. And the ISP, which is really exclusive and competitive now, back then, I think we just ushered ourselves right in to fit in between the art historians and the artists, because we said, what's up, no critics? And that's where we started. And I think if you want to characterize my feeling about the 70s, which was 45 years ago, I remember it was like it was yesterday. There was like an institutional framework, which I'm reminded of when I see Alana Heiss here, who ran the clock tower and the Idea Garage on Reed Street, where I saw Idea Warehouse, where I saw some fabulous performances. But I don't know. I will babble on endlessly. I think there was a sense of neighborhoodliness that we were trying to cultivate, because we didn't come from a real theoretical point of view. We came from we were just art lovers, trying to cover the scene and make a place for ourselves. So, I don't know.
No, I mean, I'm just, it's just the nature of the voices kind of bouncing off of each other. So I was just trying to, can you, maybe, Pat, you want to say something?
I met Ed and her then husband, Peter. Before ART-RITE, I met her at a dinner uptown in a Hungarian restaurant, among other friends of mine. And she was a genius at connecting, because they were just off the boat, and they were there in the middle of a group of New York artists. And I knew Ed almost to the end, for a long time. And I always felt part of ART-RITE, although I wasn't, but it was a magazine for people who didn't belong, and I didn't belong either, so it was great. I was invited to do a cover. I don't know if I ever wrote anything or anything was ever written about me, I can't remember. But I did a cover that I thought would be cheap to print, potato prints. And it turned out that it was very labor intensive. They kept wearing out potatoes trying to...
It was actually fun and memorable, if a piece of work, to do 3 different colors with potato prints on, I think, 2,000 issues.
By hand.
No, you didn't really have anything to do anyways.
So doing that, I didn't think it was hard, or I didn't think I misused them or anything. And it was a wonderful time to be, I felt part of it, and then Walter and Edit became part of Printed Matter, and I was at the founder of Printed Matter. We all lasted together for a long time. We never had a big fight, did we?
Oh, we never fought at all.
No. See?
Nothing to say to this?
Can I say something first about Edit DeAk, who was sort of the reigning inspiration and much of the force behind the magazine, and I really miss her and wish she were here now. She died 2 years ago, but I think back, and so much of it would never have been possible without her fearlessness. You know, I was actually a very shy guy from the Midwest. What I could do was produce the magazine, because I had a job working at the Jewish Week and an American Examiner, a weekly newspaper that we would steal the type from. But Edit, I think, really was the one who did all the inspired things. I think she contacted the artists for the covers, and she had the nerve to go up to Leo Castelli and demand that he give her an ad. And so I really miss her and really wish she were here to sort of carry on.
Walter, could you tell a little bit just about the Edit story of escaping in the trunk of a car?
She and her husband Peter Grass were from Hungary, and Edit was Catholic and Peter was Jewish, and as teenagers they found passion for each other, and they decided to run away so they ran away to Yugoslavia, and then they convinced two separate drivers to put them in the trunk and drive them across the border. And this is the story that struck me the most, that they would split up and go in the trunks of strangers' cars. But it worked out fine, and a Jewish relief agency brought them to Baltimore, and then they made their way to New York, and like I said, we met in an art criticism seminar, and then when I came down to visit them, Peter, who today is, I think, 72, he's an artist, he lives in Catskill, he's got a church that he lives in. Peter was very handy, and they had leased the top floor of 149 Wooster Street, 7,000 square feet, split it in half, so they had a 3,500 square foot loft with a big studio in the back and living quarters in the front. I guess it wasn't that unusual at the time, but I was pretty impressed, and I think that's where the magazine operated from during the 70s.
Maybe you could clear something up for everybody at this moment. So it might throw your current personal life into turmoil. We all thought you were having an affair with Benji for all those years.
Who, me? Well, that's the exciting part of the story. She was a beautiful, sexy girl, and she had an accent like Zsa Zsa Gabor, except she wasn't goofy. She was serious, and we had varying degrees of closeness and separateness. I'll tell you the whole stupid story later. I've told it before. There were originally 3 of us who founded the magazine. 2 guys, me and my best friend, and Edit. And then after a little while, there were just 2 of us running the magazine. You could guess what happened. So he quit the art world, went back to school, and now he's an international banker, thanks to me.
Yeah, I see a lot of familiar faces out here. And my journey to New York, first, Catherine Bigelow was my friend in San Francisco. She came to New York to be on this Whitney program. And I'm like, I want to do that. And then Marcia Tucker came out and gave a talk in San Francisco. And I begged Marcia, I sat at her foot, and I'm like, please, I want to go to New York. So Marcia wrote me a letter and called people at the Whitney program and got me in by the skin of my teeth. Then I hitchhiked to New York, and the first person I met in New York was Pat Steir, who I met because I went to your house to get a key to Marcia's house, because Marcia gave me her, she was up in Chelsea at the time, and I stayed there for 2 weeks while they were on vacation or something. So I met you, barely. You stuck your hand out and gave me the key. I'm like, hi, bye. So then I stayed in Chelsea. What was I gonna say? Yeah, this is a tribal thing. Walter and I know each other from the Whitney program to begin with. Carlo and I both go to the same church. We're neighbors in the Catskills. The first piece I had in ART-RITE was a letter to Nelson Rockefeller. I wrote him a letter and all my work in ART-RITE was anonymous. I think I have my name on one thing about artist books, but the rest of my contributions, and I had like 5 things in ART-RITE. At the time, I did everything anonymously, and I was more interested in the character than I was in my own name and personality. But so the first thing I had in ART-RITE was a letter to Nelson Rockefeller, who was an art supporter and a murderer. It was not too long after Attica. I guess Attica happened in '71. So I wrote Nelson this letter, and I had a mask on and kind of voodoo sticks in my hand, and I was suggesting to Nelson that he come play in my sandbox, and that all of his world power domination ideas could be acted out with me in a sandbox and maybe shown on community television. I never heard from him, but thank God.
That's
for
so funny, because I remember you wanted him to hire you as a world domineering artist, because you are a world dominationer, because you had worked in all these other artist jobs and you wanted him to hire you. Robin, I have to say that, like, a lot of things happened in the 70s, and one thing that happened, I think, was a real strong performance art movement. That's why we did a performance art issue. And Robin, I think, was one of the younger artists who had the most juice. He was the most inspiring, most original, and worked like a maniac.
I'll read my letter. Dear Vice President Rockefeller, I understand that you are a connoisseur of the arts. I'm currently involved in work which reflects the artist's role in society. I'm interested in society's roles in general. In my work thus far, I have assumed roles as the artist as a madman, the artist as a shaman, the artist as a worker, the artist as a salesman, the artist as a trader, the artist as an oracle. I'm currently performing a piece entitled W.B. Behrman Bags a Job at the Whitney Museum. I propose a performance as the artist as a world power. I'm willing to work at $50 per day, 5 days a week, plus space, materials, and traveling expenses. I would perform this piece in your underground nuclear fallout shelter, which would be rigged with closed-circuit television available to all the heads of state of all the countries. My performance would consist of the characterization of a world power by manipulating toy objects representing the real world. For example, forts, boundaries, boats, maps, borders, bombs, airplanes, plastic people, cars, money, houses, factories, waterways, forests, mountains, roads, monuments, castles, estates, ghettos, prisons, deserts, etc. The entire set will be fabricated in miniature stylized objects that are clearly representative of the real world. I will act out the part of a world power named SS Perodabo, moving borders, dropping bombs, building castles, putting plastic people in miniature prisons, tearing down forests, driving my miniature cars fast, throwing my money around. Consider your fallout shelter to be a large sandbox stage for a play about the world as my palette. I think that if you and other world powers would watch my performance, you might find it funny. You might also, it seems much safer and more humane to allow Napoleonic complexes to remain in miniature. P.S. I am for depression entertainment. I am for guaranteed annual wage. I am for a nationalized oil industry. I am for socialized medicine and legal defense. I am for equal food and natural resource sharing between all nations. I am against the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So that's really old. 1973, I think. Pretty impressive. There you go. Yeah, nothing.
ART-RITE has this kind of beautiful hybridity in that it's kind of continuing some of the radicalisms of the 60s and early 70s. You can feel that in Robin's text. I also feel it's like, you talked about Alan Vega being on the cover, and it was also very much at that moment when punk is happening. They're just, about to happen in New York, but ends in 78, punk's happening already. And one of the things I think about is that it did have this sort of DIY aspect, which we've ascribed to punk, but it comes beforehand, and it comes out of artist communities beforehand. Pat, you mentioned how you and Walter were both part of the kind of founding of printed matter, but you did Heresies, which was, weren't you one of the founders of that? Which was, to me, like a great magazine. And semiotext, and Silver. Yeah, so these things I think were really strong as Walter said performance art was back then. And Robin, you did like your own weird galleries, and you still do your own weird galleries. So these things kind of continue, but maybe you can talk about how you had the nerve or the stupidity just to create these incredible projects like ART-RITE or Heresies or whatever.
Well, we had nothing to lose, and so that made us able to do anything. And I had the first 10 years of my adult life, I worked as an art director for a publisher, for Harper & Row publisher. So although I was older than Walter and Edith, I was the same generation artistically, and because I quit my job, got a teaching job, started to work at all those fledgling magazines. I didn't ever work at ART-RITE, but I worked at Heresies and Semiotext, and was a founder of Printed Matter. And founding Printed Matter, I had the idea of crossing a street in Genoa. I asked Salawit if he would finance a publishing company for me. And he said, yes, but you have to publish mass-produced artist books. And I said, okay. I was thinking of that as a job I could have if art failed me. So I wrote to Eddie. I sent her a postcard, and I said, we're starting this business, get a board together. And she did. She got a board together. And that board became the founding board of Printed Matter. And she just sent postcards to everybody. And then Solomon around talking to people on the board, and he made everyone feel like they started Printed Matter with him. And that was a good thing, because everybody felt involved, totally involved, like they were the partner of the founding Printed Matter. Meanwhile, it wasn't a job, it was a lot of work. We published 10 books in the first 2 years, I think. And then we hired Ingrid Sishi, who helped us go not-for-profit. I think we were the first, and maybe still the only bookstore that's not-for-profit. It has that designation. I don't know about now, but it was a new thing. And she wrote an essay comparing it to performance spaces are often not-for-profit. And she compared it to a performance space with shut-ins in her letter to the government who gives you that designation. And so that was again, but it was, for me, ART-RITE, I don't know if I was ever more part of it than doing the one cover. I can't remember if I wrote anything or they wrote anything about me, but I always felt part of it because it was so freewheeling. I was bouncing around, but it wasn't part of any programmed kind of thought. It wasn't conceptual, it wasn't minimal, it wasn't performance, it was everything and anything else you could think of. And so I felt part of it because I felt, although I was part of so many magazines and book company, I felt like an outsider, and it was sort of the outsiders forum, I thought. What did you think, Walter?
I feel like there was a lot of stuff going on, and we were trying to clear a little space for ourselves. You know, there were the existing art magazines like Art Forum and Art in America, and not only Heresies ART-RITE, but like the Fox and a whole bunch of magazines, people trying to make space for themselves. And I think one of the real values today in this new book is all the people we got involved, not so much our editorial brilliance, but the fact that we got a whole lot of people involved, and we have all these texts left over from then, even though after 40 years it seems all fairly incoherent, or sometimes I wish we'd put the artist's name in the first paragraph once in a while. And I'm pretty sure that we forgot to credit Ed Boucher when he did our cover. I was looking at it, it's by Ed Boucher, but I think we forgot to credit him. And I know he's misspelled Alan Capro's name on the essay he wrote for us. And one of my favorite pieces was a letter from Linda Nochlin, where she straightened us out on the E-Bergs versus the U-Bergs, Oldenburg being a U-Berg and Greenberg being an E-Berg. We had gotten it mixed up. So I think the point of all this, there's maybe some kind of virtue in doing things before you know how to do them. I don't know. That's part of what Pat was talking about not really knowing any barriers. You know, the energy and fearlessness of 20-somethings. You know, that I see today everywhere. It can't be underestimated.
I was going to say that when I first got to New York, Pat was a great inspiration to me, partly because you were doing magazines, and I had a book that you did the cover for. It was a Ludwig Wittgenstein, and you did the drawing on the cover, and your paintings at that time were full of all kinds of crazy imagery, and we were in the face of minimalism at that moment, so you liberated the painting world in the sense of, like, you painted whatever you wanted, and that gave a lot of us permission to feel that way as well. And so also I wanted to mention Jeffrey, because when I first got to know Jeffrey, he was an art worker at John Weber Gallery, as I remember. And Jeffrey came to, like, my performance on the Bowery, which I had a poster that said, to Gandhi dancers and roustabouts, look for the man in the yellow hat. And I just hung out with bums all day long, every day for 2 months. In the evenings I had dinners that I did blind dates and double dates, so every night you could buy a ticket for one person or 2 people. But Jeffrey came and actually sat with me on the Bowery, which hardly anybody did. You know, so I would say he was an intrepid art appreciator from the get-go. And I have film of Jeffrey and many other people, Gordon Mata and Joan Jonas and Hannah Wilke, all wearing rubber top hats that I made. And it's a 16mm film where I asked the audience to play a part, and then I played a part. And I keep coming back to all the people I know, because it's how I've survived here for so long. It's just the tribal support I've gotten from many of you.
What you might share in common, which is not a lot visually, the three of you, is that to me you have this conceptual basis for your work. Like you're talking about Saul. I mean, like what a great figure Saul the Wit was, but that all of you somehow brought a level of kind of the seduction of what is visually compelling at that time, and which was maybe a little lacking in the art world in the 70s. And in that way, you transition, and a lot of you kind of all become more famous in the 80s than you were in the 70s. And I think there's that movement. Am I totally wrong on this? What do you think?
Well, we were outsiders. I keep saying that, but because there was minimalism and conceptualism, we were the outsiders, and that gave a tremendous amount of freedom. And particularly, heresies had one point of view, the Semiotics had one point of view, but ART-RITE had all the point of view. There was no limit. I think that Ed and Walter allowed themselves to think anything, to play with any kind of thought. And so it wasn't like joining basic philosophy or feminism. It could be that, but it could also be 1,000 other things, and was. And that's what my joy in it was, that I could, and I have to say that I think art and literature and magazines reflect the society as it is when they're being made. And although we felt the society maybe was closed a little bit to us, there was much more freedom and movement. And because all the things that we were doing put together reflect that time. No one thing does, but they all do. And I think it's a different time now. I'm old, so I don't know exactly if it's a different time. It seems like a different time to me.
Walter, did you mean, it seems really, just real quick, it strikes me as an incredibly irreverent magazine, considering the gravitas of some of the ideas and certainly the figures in it. Did you mean to be such kind of jerks that way? It was great.
I think there's a lot of nonsense in the magazine. That's what actually bothers me when I look at it. I was like going through the book in preparation for this today, and I couldn't believe how like emotional I was getting, like with these old memories. But you know, I remember what I thought as a 23-year-old when we started the magazine. I thought that you know, all the smart kinds of art had already been done, and it had reached a kind of peak. You know, you had conceptual art, you had minimal art, you had pop art. Everything had been done, and I had this feeling that you had to do something new. You know, you had to do something original, but everything had already been done. As all the spaces on the wall were taken. Of course, like a couple decades later, postmodernism would come along and change our mind. But what I saw happening in the 70s, and it's reflected in the magazine's theme issues, is this kind of horizontal spreading. You know, I remember hearing Phil Glass playing on West Broadway, and we had a performance issue, and there was a video issue. Everybody was making videos. And the artist book issue, if you can believe it, in the 70s, it felt like all of a sudden everybody was making artist books because they wanted to make something that was democratic, because the political impulses of the 60s had been anti-commodity, and so it felt like we were spreading out sideways, you know, rather than heading up, you know, towards the mountain. And at the same time, alternative spaces was a big thing in the 70s. You know, the government, the feds and the state would give us money. That's where some of our funding came from. And I think, so people like Alana and the new museum and artist space and the kitchen were all like getting money from the government, and somehow that helped. I always thought it was kind of a secret conspiracy with these progressive art bureaucrats that we were supposed to match the grants one-to-one with other fundraising, which of course we couldn't do, but they would let us match the grants with our in-kind services, our own work. So actually the government was just sort of giving us the money to do what we wanted, and that all went away at the end of the 70s and the 80s as part of the culture wars of the 80s. But one thing I can't, well, anyway, what was your question? What was it?
So, ART-RITE was definitely like a gateway drug in the sense that there were more women in ART-RITE than any of the other art magazines. There was more of a queer presence. I would say there's not very many people of color. Adrian Piper, I don't know who else, but that was the one I could find. And I'm gonna give you some shit now. Chris Burden, he did a terrible piece in ART-RITE. He did a very racist work. Yeah, bongo lips trapped in a white skin. And that was, I believe, a cover of your horrible magazine. I love you dearly. But so, come on, you can find it. It's in there. But I mean, I'm only bringing that up because really it was like there was this edge of consciousness happening that's way more developed now. And yet the problems still completely exist in terms of the proportions of representation in the art world. And
While Walter looks for that, it just makes me think of something. One of the things I like that appears often in the magazine, and you really kind of felt, because this is before the internet and text messaging and stuff, you really felt the kind of social conversation of it, is you'd ask a lot of different people one question. A lot of famous collectors, they'd ask them if they're collectors or patrons, and you'd hear people like Skull, try to parse the difference, but there was one where you asked all these women artists. I'm trying to get your attention, Walter. Yeah, that's a difficult piece. You asked all these women artists if there was a feminine aesthetic, and except for Hannah Wilke, who always, did like to talk about vaginas a lot, most of them were like, "Fuck you, no." And I thought that was really great, that basically a really strong group of women were going, and it reminded me like the way Basquiat, who never shirked his awareness of what it meant to be a black man in a totally white art world, he would be like, why does everyone call me a black artist? Why can't they just call me an artist? And I thought of that with basically all the responses from these now famous women artists being like, stop calling me a woman artist, I'm just an artist. And I wonder how that plays out with the way identity politics has evolved now. And not sure if that's a rhetorical question or if you have something to say. Maybe you want to try that, Pat.
Well, I was just included in a book, and it said, the title was Great Women Artists, and then they crossed out the word women. So still, it's there. And they interviewed some of the artists for film, and I was one of the artists film, and I tried to explain that you're not a woman artist, you're not a man artist, you're not a queer artist, you're an artist. And that's what I believe. If you spend your whole life making art, that's what you are. And even if you spend half your life making art, that's what you are. And to be designated as a woman artist is weird. Though I want to do a show of 13 men artists. Okay, I'll do that.
I mean, that would be nice, except it's just not the way it plays out in the real world.
Well,
And it's changed, but not enough.
I don't have my phone here, but just last night, my new dealer sent me a email with a quote she photographed off the wall of some other woman's show that said that. The quote said more or less that nobody can, if I have the feeling I want to work and I want to work, no man can stop me. That was the quote she sent me. And she said that reminded her of me, so that's good.
Cool. I think it's a really interesting audience. Should we let them ask some questions? What do you guys think? Good? Yeah. Should I be like, Jeffrey, did you want to get the first question in? No.
Okay, who would like to ask the first question? Someone has. Okay.
Question? Tell me what happened to you, Carlo. You said at the beginning that you just had a alteration of your hair or your head.
Oh no, and I was just making a bad joke. I just said because I had bad tech the other time, I thought it was a plate in the back of my head. But
Oh, okay.
that's just an insensitive, tone-deaf joke.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was kind of concerned the whole evening that
Yeah.
you might fall over. That you
Yeah, well, I might still.
come on. No, I only questions about you, but.
Come on, don't be shy. Give it up.
That is, could artists who have participated in ART-RITE that are here, raise your hand? I'd love to see a
Judy?
representation of who is here, how many people are here who actually did a magazine or did a cover or did articles.
Judy did, yeah, there we go. Yeah. That's Levine. That's you're practically a regular.
Our very first cover artist is here, Les Levine. He found a smile and picked it up.
And Judy Rivka, I've got so many of your drawings from the last issue of ART-RITE that you did the entire ART-RITE.
It was 2 years of my life.
Yeah, full of drawings. It's a beautiful piece.
Well, since we already talked, maybe it's, but Jeffrey finds the next question. It's probably really trite, but we are talking, as Walter pointed out, about 45 years ago, so we're also talking just the three of you and many in the audience about stubbornness or persistence or survival, because the world keeps changing and careers go up and down, and up here, you've all had highs and lows in your career, and you've managed to survive and prosper and continue, and that's true for many people in the room, because the art world is kind of a shiftable landscape, and I don't know if there's any wisdom or any tricks you can teach anyone here who's younger about how do you stay in for the long game and be relevant 45 years later?
I've been high the whole time.
And I've been hiding in public. So, and that's the way to do it. Just be present and do what you want. And hope for the best. And
Well,
I never thought of it as a career, so that was helpful. It still is helpful. I don't think of it as my career. It's what I do every day because I'm a fool. I go to the studio and I work. And I wouldn't know what else to do. So I think not thinking of it as a career, then you don't have to think about ups and downs.
You've got a beautiful show up right now in Washington, right? Is it still up?
It's up for a year,
It's
yes.
an amazing body of work. Being living artists.
It was hard work, really hard work. It's a color wheel, so it starts with red, and the red becomes orange, and the orange becomes yellow, and the yellow becomes green, and the yellow becomes green, and the green becomes blue, and the blue becomes purple, and it's 30 paintings in a round. The gallery in the Hirshhorn is round. It's a full circle, so it's,
And I'm running a gallery right now in my house called Key Club, where I give the artist a key, and they can install whatever they want and be present for a month, and it's by appointment only, so come visit Key Club sometime.
where is
We
it?
have a Robert Hawkins show up right now that ends on Wednesday. Then I'm doing a group show called Friends, and Friends is curated by myself and 2 other artists, and each of us picked an artist, and then that artist picks an artist, then that artist picks an artist, and that artist picks, until we have 15 artists in the show. And I do a dinner party for each opening. There's no opening other than for the artists involved.
Where is?
I'm on Broadway between Houston and Prince. Actually, I have a Mercer Street address now because Victoria's Secret bought the ground floor and took away my elevator on Broadway. So now I have to walk down the hallway, 2 elevators, one to the 3rd floor, then a little one to the 4th floor.
You're on Instagram, right? That's the
Instagram,
best.
Facebook, all that kind of thing. Some of you've gotten poems from me, probably.
Walter, tell us about what went on in the ART-RITE Loft, because I remember seeing first time Jack Smith film screening. The Loft was an extension of the magazine.
Well, I wish I remembered better. I think there was, you know how office work is. It's just like an endless grind. One of the things I remember is, of course, Edith and her working with Edith, trying to translate her abstruse Hungarian prose into something we thought was readable. That's a fun memory. And the thing with Jack Smith was really kind of amazing. You know, it's one example of many. I think Jack Smith was this incredible avant-garde filmmaker who had done Flaming Creatures. More than I think a decade earlier, it had caused maybe a riot. He was arrested by the police. But by the mid-70s, he was, I don't know if he was forgotten, but he was neglected. And Edith went and got him and became his sponsor. I remember we visited him in his Lower East Side apartment. It's like a little tenement apartment that he had decorated totally in his, trademark kitschy style. And they would come over and huddle in the front, and he referred to me as the creature in the back. And they had a little room in the front that they would huddle and talk, and eventually Edith promoted him sort of to do film screenings, and Jack was very eccentric and idiosyncratic. He said, I just want to show my own films. So she'd arrange these events where he projected his own films, and then maybe he'd have a whole lot of trouble with the projector, and maybe he'd drink a little bit too much and throw up into a trash can. But one of the more exciting things I think that happened at the Loft on Wooster Street was when this German artist, Christoph Kohlhofer, came over. We had gone to Europe, I think, in 1975 or 76 with the idea of doing a European issue. That's, if you look at the book, the missing number 20 or number 19 is the European issue we never did. But when we went to Europe, we ran into Christoph in the gallery and asked if we could stay with him, and we stayed with him for a couple of nights. Then 6 months later, he came over and stayed with us for 6 months. And Christoph was a colleague and a fan of Sigmar Polken. His work had a lot to do with polkas, but he took 1 million slides. He's still around. He was an amazing artist. He'd go out into the New York night in the 70s and get these photographs of the city burning down and the firemen fighting fires and the water freezing in the winter. And with all these slides, we'd have these slideshows at the Loft in carousels that played music. And I'm not sure if it inspired Leanne Golden's Ballad of Sexual Dependency or was just part of the same impulse, but that was definitely one of the kinds of events that would happen. We'd have these parties. Oh, and I want to also credit Edith for, it was a time of Super 8. You could buy Super 8 cameras for not very much money, and you could get 2.5 or 3 minute rolls of film and send them off to be developed. And Edit shot incessantly, sort of random Super 8 film of us goofing off in the loft, young girls taking off their clothes, guys skating around, and before she died, she worked with Patrick Fox, who's here, to put together a sort of montage of all these films, which I think Patrick and Edit got it acquired by the Museum of Modern Art, which digitalized it, and it's now there's 81 minutes of this home movie at the Modern in the very sub-basement. The Modern just opened, and they have a big show of home movies down in the film department, and so you can go there and watch 81 minutes of all of us goofing around in the loft, and it's like, to me, it's like a lesson in how to be a bohemian. You don't really have to do very much. Smoke a cigarette, dance around, take your shirt off. Anyway.
Yeah, I have a question just in terms of like place in this neighborhood that we're in, and how Soho and Sohoites, who, when I first became aware of it in the early 70s, was kind of I thought of as an artist ghetto, and that it was really occupied by a lot of middle class, educated, younger people who were living in substandard housing, who were building their own living spaces, who had lack of cafes and restaurants. And how do you feel that contributed to, say, the DIY nature of ART-RITE, and how you built a sense of a community where there was none before? This was the truck and warehouse district, and Finelli's was really the only bar that would allow dogs to come in. And I think that there's something interesting about how ART-RITE was really a journal of community. And how do you feel that avoided senses of a hierarchy and that would develop around gender or race and class?
Well, nothing would have happened if it hadn't been for us.
Wasn't that where a lot of these people also got together and it generated a real kind of social aspect, an artist getting together down there? I saw you guys down at Tribeca. Where are these?
Yeah, we were on Reed Street, and I thought I could live there. I got kicked out after like 2 days because we're not supposed to be artists living in our school environment. But so it forced me to find a place to live on Green Street and get a job at the Spring Street Bar and work for all the artists in Soho at the time.
I think the Soho had already become an artist community by the time I got there in 1973. I think it had already been set up. In fact, there are artists living there in the 50s, if not before.
Well, food, I was thinking of the restaurant food.
Food was started around then. Yeah. And
It's a nice vestiges of the fluxus throughout.
That's right.
It's like Dick Higgins or Al Hansen.
George Mitchum.
Yeah, George Mitchum. But so there was in ART-RITE, we actually still had a bit of those voices in there, and I think that's kind of part of the hybrid mix I like so much.
we were actually beneficiaries of all the work that people did to make it into an artist district, and there was all this politics and local government politics that I really hadn't, it was sort of ancient history. Remember, there used to be a panel. You were supposed to be certified as an artist to live in a loft, but by the time we got there, I don't know, people just nodded at it. It didn't really happen. I lived in a couple lofts, never had to be certified, but that's a whole other weird history that I'm not the person to talk about.
When I leave my house now, I go straight out on Mercer Street and I see the old Tony Shafrazi gallery, which after it was Tony Shafrazi, who was it? Mark Jacobs had it, and now it has pop-up shows, store things every week. This week it's the Beatles. So they do the vinyl cover of the whole building, and it's the Beatles. Last week it was Chobani. The week before that it was Epiphany Industries, whatever that is. And the week before that it was a Mexican restaurant. So they're, you know, and I'm sure it's a very high-end price.
But one thing interesting about Soho, I think Anna Chave, the art historian and critic, is the one who wrote an essay that made me realize this, that the existence of these big industrial lofts sort of made it possible for, say, artists like Richard Serra to do big prop pieces, and all that kind of large-scale minimalism actually comes out of the structural reality of a place like Soho. But, yeah.
My first performance in New York was in my loft. There were no artists living in the building. It was a factory building, and it was all factory workers. And what did I do? I made a one-way mirror in the front of my house, and I built a factory. So I was in there making rubber top hats every day as this character who was trying to make a monument for everybody in the world.
I remember that.
But my audience was mostly the guys who worked in the factories in the building.
You were going to make a hat for everybody in the world.
I did so.
I have a question. Well, what about the title? Does RITE at that time in the 70s, is it coming out of some interest in rites, rituals, the sort of primitivist sort of thing that Lucy Lepard wrote about in Overlay? Or is it a pun on R-I-G-H-T, a pun on W-R-I-T-E, or what?
I never thought of any of that before. I think, you know, it's definitely down market. So it's like ShopRite, it's like a dollar store. But I don't think we were very much into rituals and their meaning. You know, I think. Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm overcome by this book that I've been reading in the studio called Goodbye to 10th Street. It's by Irving Sandler, and it's set in the 50s when everybody was an abstract expressionist. And they're all so angst-filled, and they're also all competitive because color field painting is coming, and pop art is here. But I'm reading this book, and I'm really absorbing, I'm being influenced by that angstful attitude towards the pictures I make. And you know, it's like so powerful. It's kind of a bad book, but it's that feeling of studio angst. I think that, you know, I can feel it with this painting I have on the wall, you know, even though I'm not into rites and that kind of spirituality, but I can still feel like trying to make it look good. I recommend that book, though. It's really kind of an interesting flashback to the 50s and what it felt like.
Do we have time for another question? Yeah.
What years was ART-RITE exactly?
It was from 73 to 78, and we definitely slowed down at the end. We were losing some of our inspiration. I think the first couple of years we did maybe three a year, and then they kept getting thicker.
And can you talk a little more about the spawn of ART-RITE?
The which?
The spawn, you know, it filtered out into so many other, or you all filtered out into so many other organizations and projects, and it at least when I came along, it seemed like it was already dying.
I think it was Betsy Baker who in reference to Jackson Pollock urinating into Peggy Guggenheim's fireplace, she gave me this notion that I've had ever since: better as legend than reality.
I was curious about, with this deal, it feels like there's some relationship. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about how those, punk and the DIYs are sorry.
Can you repeat that?
I'm not sure, what was the question? How,
okay.
how punk had something to do with it?
Yeah, was there a conversation between punk rock and ART-RITE in that they were downtown in New York around the same time? And I was just wondering if there was like a conversation or some sort of influence coming back and forth between the two phenomena.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think as far as I was concerned, punk rock came a little later, and I know that at the end of the 80s, a lot of people who were hanging out with us were going down to the Mud Club and like that, but by then we stopped doing the magazine. You know, for me it wasn't that important. Maybe there's some kind of alignment and sensibilities, but I think ART-RITE was generally more positive and not so ostentatiously anti-establishment compared to what punk rock was. But
Alan Vega, punk rock.
oh, that's right.
Alan, Suicide.
That's right.
He did a whole.
He did music.
That's right. He performed. That's right. I did the music video. I forgot about that. He performed there, so.
I'd like to give you an old memory of Edit, one I treasure. This is an old memory of Edit. She came by to get me. She had a car. Edit had a car. She liked to drive in New York. She couldn't drive, but she liked to. She drove in the middle of the street. She drove any way she wanted to. She didn't care. It was always at night anyway. And she picked me up in that really big car she had. I think it was a convertible. And we went uptown. She said, Alana, I'm going to take you uptown and show you something. And she took me up to Harlem, and we went to a nightclub together. And there were all these wonderful people there. It was great music. And we sat there and drank and drank and drank. And there were beautiful black showgirls. And she turned to me and she said, have you ever considered that we were really in the wrong business? And she said, people are really having fun all over New York. Let's make sure we always have fun. So that's the girl with the long red hair and the amber eyes that was such an influence on ART-RITE and gave us all such a wonderful gift of happiness and joy and wickedness, adventure, and all the wonderful articles that you, Michael, and you, Robin, and all of you worked on. Thank you. Thank you all.
That was such a good last word.
Yeah, that was the last word. Okay, so if more questions, you can just come and talk to everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's just wonderful how many people are here. And I guess this is a retort to people who say that art in New York is over and Soho's over. We're very much still here.